What's going on, everyone? It's another episode of the WVSports.com podcast. I'm Wesley Shoemaker, and as always, joined by my lovely co-host, the one and only Keenan Cummings. So, Keenan, it is April 17th, and we are in the midst of what is a crazy couple of weeks, not only on the basketball front, but on the football front, and they're crazy for the same reason, and that is roster construction and deconstruction, I guess you could say, with both. Obviously, the transfer portal is what it is. Everyone knows about it. Roster size for football is what it is. So let's start there, because if you have been paying attention to our site, to social media over the last week and a half, really ever since the end of the spring game, you knew what was coming, and now you've seen it coming, and that is the onslaught of guys who are no longer on the West Virginia football team, who are no longer here, who are either in the portal or have basically kind of been cut in a sense just because they have to hit certain roster numbers. And as we have been told by Rich Rodriguez throughout the spring, this was coming. It was only a matter of time until it actually came. Obviously, you kind of had to wait until that spring practice window ended, but here we are, and you've had a bunch of guys leave.
37, I believe.
You've had a couple guys, I guess, transfer in or announce that they're going to transfer in, including one today. And then you've got more spots on your roster to fill between now and whenever. So let's start there. Where are we in terms of guys leaving and some names that might have surprised you?
Well, I believe the number is 37 if you can count scholarship and walk-on players. I guess walk-on won't be a thing in the future, but currently walk-on players that have exited. You look down the list, there's a few, I think, that catch your attention, for different reasons. All the true freshmen that had enrolled, had just enrolled in January kind of stand out. Obviously, Amir Leonard Jean Charles, Ramondo Johnson, Brant, and you go down that list. I mean, there's several of them, some DBs as well. Sammy Etienne, Chris Henry, those were guys that I thought had a chance to be pretty good players, obviously down the road. And it's important to note, Wes, we're calling this cutting. Some of this could be decisions by the prospects. Some of it could be decisions by the coaches. Some of it could be mutual. So not all of these situations are created equal, but it's apparent that, Rich Rodriguez and his coaching staff did what they told us, all spring, that they were going to have to make some tough decisions. It sucks, but they're going to have to get the roster down. In terms of veterans, I don't know if there's any.
Spells is a name.
Yeah, Jacoby Spells is a guy that played. Jack Samarco is the only one on that list of those guys, that all those names I mentioned, that isn't officially in the portal yet, but he was removed from the roster. That's one that kind of surprised me. LJ Turner's another, just because they had just brought him in. Same thing with Johnny Pascuzzi, the tight end from Iowa. Those were two Rich Rod recruits, two Rich Rod transfers that came in that left. The rest of these guys were either already on the roster or were incoming freshmen. So is there anything where you're like, oh, man, that was a massive blow to the roster? No, not right now. Could some of these players develop into that? Yes, but that goes back to what Rich has talked about all spring. You don't necessarily have time to wait and kind of take 25 freshmen anymore and wait a class, wait two classes. There's too much turnover. It's too hectic. And I think you're seeing that play out in real time. It's unfortunate, but I think Rich was very upfront the whole spring. He didn't want to do this. They didn't want this to happen. They talked about grandfathering players in, and there's some discussion, but I don't think that's going to end up happening. I think if the 105 is going to be the 105, and you're going to kind of go from there. It's really silly the way they're doing this and not structuring this. Make a massive change like that in 1 year and expect players not to get lost in the shuffle is kind of ridiculous, but that's where we're at. And now, obviously now becomes the work of filling those spaces. Right now, if you count the guys that West Virginia has brought in, either committed or signed already and not yet enrolled, I think the number is 94 scholarship.
93 on our chart that you have.
I have not added the new commitment today yet, so it'd be 94 now. Um, that's about what I expected, truthfully. I mean, I thought they'd probably have anywhere between 15 to 12 spots to fill. They've got a lot of needs. I know that it seems kind of crazy after adding 30 some transfers and 40 some players, in the spring, but West Virginia still has needs. The offensive line, obviously, as you could tell today with the commitment from Clay. The linebacker position, it's been hit hard. A lot of guys being offered, a lot of guys being targeted. Defensive line, that's where you saw the most attrition in terms of maybe guys you thought would eventually or could become something. So it looks like they're going to go older there on the defensive line, which is to be expected. Defensive back's going to remain. Probably going to have to take a running back now. You only got a few on the scholarship chart. Probably going to have to take one or two more tight ends. Everybody's favorite position. It went from having 25 guys to now there's 3 guys on the roster that can play the position. So there's a lot of work still to be done. This is going to keep moving and shaking. Rich said that he'd like to have everything kind of finalized with what they want on the roster by July. And I think that that's your target goal. And obviously it's going to move quicker here in the next coming week or so, next couple weeks as players set up visits and guys get to campus and make decisions. But you'll still have some guys probably being added to this thing pretty late, because this is obviously first year under a new coach in a climate where you can do this and you can rebuild a roster in a lot of different ways. I've said it a bunch on the message board and it bears repeating here. It's never been easier to rebuild a roster than it is right now. And does that guarantee success? No, but it does guarantee that Rich is getting the guys in the program that, fit what he wants to do, fit his coaching style. And I mean, that's not fair to some of the guys that were here before. They gave it a try. They stayed the spring, and obviously some of them it wasn't for them. Some of them obviously weren't for Rich and the staff. It's going to happen. But right now, I think the biggest piece of news, I'm kind of burying the lead here, Wes. The biggest piece of news of all this is out of all these names, these 30-some guys that I've mentioned, and there could be some more in the coming days. So far, knock on wood, Wes, so far, there haven't been any that are just, wow, I can't believe that guy's leaving. So that is so far been the good news with this roster rebuild.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that hasn't been anyone that's really kind of been taking on-field production and talent away from this roster as in terms of what we would have seen in 2025. While that talent might be there and on-field production might be there in 26, 27 and beyond, in terms of this upcoming season, you're not really losing that. Out of those 94, I think now 31 of them are seniors. That's an interesting number to me. And 20 of them are true freshmen. So you can kind of see it where Rich is banking on experience in terms of let's play now, but also trying to build what he wants to build foundationally with all these true freshmen. That's interesting to me, at least, just because it's so new and everything's so different. And we've heard all spring from everyone is that the 105 is tricky because now you're going to have guys do multiple things in multiple capacities. It seems like they're going to be asking some true freshmen to get some playing time by just the way the roster numbers are shaken out. And we'll see. That could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. We can't really predict that. But that is something that catches my eye. And also the fact that the 31 seniors right now, I bet that number might jump to 35 or more. I really bet they're going to go after the dudes who they know they can plug and play right now. Because you really, at this point in the cycle, it's hard to take a kind of a project player or someone you aren't really sure about. If this was January or post November, December, right? Then you kind of can because then you have the whole spring period. But that's what I kind of want to keep an eye on too as they go through this whole roster rebuild, adding 10 or to 12 more guys is what happens in terms of how old these guys are, because that's the biggest thing too, Keenan, is if you're entering the portal, you're either entering it because you didn't play at an institution or you think you should play more at a different institution. And that's kind of the biggest question mark for most guys is your talent more than what you were doing at school X, or were you at school X and school Y is better because you can produce at that higher level?
You left out dollar signs. That's another
Yeah.
reason why people are doing it too. That's important to mention. And this 105 number includes all players too. So for any out there wondering, you can check out our scholarship chart. It's on our website. I update that thing pretty frequently, honestly. that was the last thing I'd was going to get around to today until this happened. But our transfer portal tracker is updated if you want to keep track of all the movement in and out of the roster so far. Really, so far for West Virginia, I think that if you can get a guy, you mentioned older, if you can get a guy with 2 years left, that's amazing. But I think that Rich has proven that he's going to take the best players, regardless of their age. Obviously, it's going to help if they've got experience, and usually experienced guys have 1 or 2 years left. So I think that's what you're going to see. Obviously the offensive tackle that was added today has 1 year left, started all the games last year at North Alabama, was very productive, graded out high on PFF. I think it was 77 overall. So that's a solid addition, a guy that has experience, a position that needs help. And I expect they're far from done there. Even with, I think that's the 7th offensive lineman they've added from the transfer portal. I think you can expect a couple more, maybe some interior guys, maybe a center, just even if it's not for starting reasons, just to increase competition. I think that competition is a big word for this coaching staff. It's not something that's thrown around lightly. They mean it. They want to push guys. You could see that even, in the winter when they brought in, 7 DBs, senior DBs?
Yeah.
Or 8 or 9. I don't even remember the number at this point, but it was a lot. And you look at where those guys are now, they're kind of filling out. I guess if you want to guess at a depth chart, I would imagine that those are guys that are kind of at the tops of their positions. So
between your safeties and cornerbacks, you've got 20 on your roster right now. I believe 10 of them are seniors.
Yeah, and most of them were brought in.
Yeah,
if not all of them.
I think only 2 are returners. Maybe only 1. I think.
Yeah, because Spells is gone now. So
yeah, so KK is the only one.
Yeah, and he played under Rich too. So
yeah,
there you go. I think that this is going to continue. There's obviously visitors coming to campus. There's one on campus right now, Shea Taylor, a linebacker from Ohio. West Virginia's involved again with Cam Rice, a defensive lineman who actually began his career here at West Virginia. A Morgantown native, was a walk-on, ended up going to West Liberty, I believe, having a great career, went to Ohio, had a great season, led to a lot of transfer portal offers, since he re-entered the portal. West Virginia is one of those. It's a school that's involved, and there's going to be a lot more names to sort through here in the coming weeks as well. So stay on your toes. It feels like it's January all over again, with it being a little bit warmer outside.
A little bit warmer, but some mornings it's certainly still chilly.
It was frosty today.
Yeah, speaking of chilly, a sport that's played in the winter is basketball, and new head coach Ross Hodge has certainly been busy. And he's been doing it by adding players to his roster, by starting to kind of add coaches unofficially to his roster, to his coaching staff, as well. But the biggest thing, I mean, Keenan, these guys that they're getting, they've got 6 new guys.
6 already, wow.
Added to next year. Jasper Floyd, Jackson Fields, Honor Huff. That was a big one. A shooter there. Brennan Lorient, Harlan Obioha.
Good job.
So, thank you. We'll get better. But no, in all seriousness, Ross Hodge is doing a good job, I would say. He's certainly attacking it, and we'll get into it in a minute of who guys he could still be going after and guys that West Virginia is going after. But when you look at this, there's a lot of guys that kind of serve a lot of needs. You got a big, you got a really good shooter. You got guys who have experience under Hodge. So what are your kind of overall thoughts right now as they are 6 guys in, and I guess technically still have 8 total on the roster?
Yeah, I think that the thing for me that stood out immediately, and I wrote about this today a little bit, is just how efficient this process has been. I think the biggest concern that people had when this hire was made was what had happened at finishing out at North Texas and the time that was going to be lost there. And we discussed that a little bit, that they were doing the same things that they would have been doing. But you're seeing, he mentioned he was going to hit the ground running. He really has. 6 additions already. These are guys that other schools wanted. I think all these guys had other high major opportunities, some of them quite a bit. And that is pretty impressive, in my opinion, to put that together this early. Honor Huff, you mentioned that. That's a big one. Brennan Lorient, very big one in my opinion. He's a guy that probably would have ended up with pretty much offers from everybody, entered the portal with a no contact tag, but really saw his game flourish, under Hodge last season at North Texas. He was a first team all conference selection, at the school and 6th man of the year in the league. pretty impressive to be a first team all league player and never start a game. So I think that speaks to the impact that he had last year, and he's going to be on the roster now. So there's more guys they're involved with. This thing could move even quicker. We could have. I don't want to speak for the coaching staff, but this number could be upwards to 8, maybe by this time next week, maybe 9. Who knows? They've got roster spots to fill. I like the construction so far. You started inside, trying to build the inside presence. Obioha, Lorient, Fields, and now you're working on some of the backcourt, wing, and those kind of options. So it's coming together pretty nicely. Most of these guys, or all of these guys that they've added so far, including DJ Thomas, a high school guy, they're all versatile defenders. Obviously, you're going to have to play defense if you want to play for Ross Hodge. It's kind of been his calling card. So all these guys have done that. Jasper Floyd from North Texas already has experience running his offense. That's a nice point guard pickup, in the portal. It's a guy that Florida State was pushing hard on. He's a Florida native, and West Virginia was able to get that done. Obviously, there was the connection there, but just goes to show that, you got a guy in place. I'm not sure where he'll fall in once this whole thing's done. But if you got him as a guy coming off the bench, I don't know if he'll start or not, but if he's a bench player, that's amazing. If he's a starter, it's still very good for what West Virginia's building. So I'm pretty impressed so far. I mean, I really am. I think this has moved. I thought it would move somewhat quickly. I didn't think it would move this quickly with what they've been able to do so far. And obviously, there's still some really big fish out there that could really push this thing over the top. And the thing that we talked about, Wes, the first time we mentioned the roster is there's a lot of good players out there.
Mm-hmm.
And there remains that.
Yeah, I think when you talk about, I know you posed the question kind of like, what are your thoughts on everything on our message board this morning? And I think it's a pretty fair question just because it's moving, in my opinion, a lot differently than it did a year ago. And it's easy to kind of have those side by sides when you're doing this twice in 12 months. But last year, it felt like it kind of dragged on. It felt like there was no movement early on, and people were starting to get restless. Now it seems like, okay, this is a start, and it's a pretty good start considering that not only have you gotten guys in terms of you just need numbers on a roster, but you're also getting dudes who have experience, who have talent. And that's as critical as any of this is. As much as you want to use the portal to get numbers, you've got to use the portal to get guys who can compete. I mean, you saw West Virginia starting 5 last year. What, all of them were transfers? So that's going to be how it is almost on a year-to-year basis for a lot of these teams. And so it's a matter of, can you get talent that can compete in the Big 12? Because it's easier said than done. And when you look around, like, the Big 12 isn't going anywhere, Keenan. As much as people want to crown the SEC, like, the Big 12 still has it in terms of how good they are at basketball. And so Ross Hodge, obviously it's an uphill battle, but he seems to have a plan in place. I mean, going inside and getting Obioha, that was a pretty big get. A 7-footer who has a lot of experience from UNC Wilmington. And it
Quite a
also
few
shows,
opportunities too. I mean, Texas, Wichita
yeah,
State, there was a bunch of schools involved there. So
it also probably shows an NIL commitment to Hodge as a coach, which with the way college sports is today, that's what you need.
yeah, I agree with you. And I think that, as I mentioned, I mean, there's potential for this to get even more exciting. There's obviously names, and we'll get into some of the names here in a minute, but names floating around, guys that have visited, are visiting right now that could make this roster build even more exciting for West Virginia. And I think that speaks to really what Ross Hodge talked about in his introductory press conference, just how that's business as usual. And you look at, we mentioned Lorient and you add Floyd too. Those are two guys that already understand the scheme. They're familiar. They can kind of help that transition along. I think bringing players with you in this new era is so important, especially guys that can play. Obviously you don't want to bring your whole team. You got to bring guys that can play at your next spot. Both these guys can play at this level. And I think that both of them, they performed well in a really, really good group of 5 league in the AAC. So I think that that's going to really help this transition too.
Yeah, and to that point, the familiarity, we saw that early on this year when Tucker was still playing with with Coach DeVries was that Tucker was kind of the general on the floor, the coach extended, and that helped them on early. Like that Atlantis tournament when he was kind of directing traffic, directing things, like that was a big deal. And so that comfortability factor, it really goes further than it seems. In terms of guys who are either have visited or West Virginia is kind of in on, I think the biggest one is probably Eagle Staff. Would you agree there?
Yeah, I would say at this point that's fair.
So we'll start there. Trayson Eaglestaff, a junior from North Dakota. He was committed to South Carolina, but then reopened his recruitment. And I know Jeff Goodman, one of the big national guys, he connected the
Trilly,
dots.
there's been a
Trilly,
couple so far.
yeah, there's been a couple of those kind of bigger name insiders that have connected West Virginia to Eagle Staff. I believe Kentucky is another one of the major players here, which I'm not sure if you can get into a bidding war with Kentucky, but that's not for us to decide. But he's really talented, a really good offensive weapon. He had a great game against Alabama, and we saw what Alabama did in the NCAA tournament this year. So, I mean,
Also
if
had
you
a
get
50 spot in the conference tournament.
yeah, if you
51
get
points.
if you get him, Keenan, that really changes things because what was the big thing that we talked about when Hodge got here was the offensive limitations. But if you have a shooter or a scorer like this, that really can kind of change things.
Yeah, you need to see how it translates, but obviously he's a guy that you're really excited about. I think he averaged 18.9 points. You know, he shot 41% from the floor. I think it was 36% from three. So he's a guy that obviously has scored at a high level. He's done it. He's done it against high major opponents. There's a lot of teams involved. You know, there wasn't his first go around before he picked South Carolina. I think just some of those schools, Kentucky, Kansas, Gonzaga, those are pretty good basketball schools. So you land a guy like that, it'll be interesting to see how he would fit. You know, how they would use it. Maybe use more three guard lineups type of deal. But that's an exciting one. It's got people buzzing on social media for good reason. Now we'll see if they can get it past the finish line, because all we got right now is literally what we've heard, and at this point that doesn't mean much until it's done. But I think that that's one that would take a really solid effort to up a level even further.
Yeah, that would, I think, calm a lot of nerves and anxiety in terms of where fans are. Moving down the list, Wes Ennis. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. You might have it better than me. Um, he is an Ohio native. He was from Lincoln University, a 6'2" point guard. He at the D2 level, he was an All-American. He was the SAC Player of the Year and their Defensive Player of the Year. Kind of fits that Ross Hodge mold of plays really good defense, but also can kind of get after it a little bit on the offensive end. Um, Another big time player, but he has officially visited WVU, which Eagle staff has not.
At least not to our knowledge.
Yeah.
No, I think that this one's exciting to me because he could play the one for you. Really productive. Both of his years at Lincoln, he was very productive. He averaged, I think it was over 20 points per game last year. Another good shooter. I think he was over 40% from three. So that would be another exciting fit. There's some other schools involved here. He's been on kind of a visit tour recently. I think he's been to NC State, Minnesota, Iowa, South Florida, and obviously West Virginia. I've been trying to find some more details out about his recruitment, but really most people I've talked to seem to not know which way this is leaning yet. He posted kind of a graphic. Well, someone posted a graphic of him the other day on some of his various visit stops, and it seemed to indicate that a decision could be coming, but you never know, with the transfer portal and new schools get involved every day. But another exciting possible addition that, if you would add both those guys, wow. Now, you never know how one recruitment's going to affect the other and how the dominoes fall. But either way, landing either of those guys would be pretty impressive to what they've already added.
Yeah, another guy just going down the list of recent guys who was here at
Today,
W today is Chance Moore. He spent last year at St. Bonaventure. Year prior, he was at Missouri State. I think he had like 24 points when Missouri State played WVU a couple years back. He's another guy. He's 6'6". He averaged 13 points, 6.5 rebounds, and over a steal per game this past year, starting all but one game. So another dude with tons of experience, which I mean, that's the name of the game as we kind of talk about both portaling and football and basketball. The guys that are attractive the most are guys who have experience because you want that proven option, and Chance Moore is certainly that.
Yeah, and he can get to the rim. He's a guy that can put the ball on the floor and get to the rim, can draw a lot of fouls, excellent rebounder for his position. He's a guy that's going to get after it on the glass and a really good defender, another versatile defender, kind of like Fields, Jackson Fields from Troy. They can move him around to defend a lot of different spots on the floor. He's got great length, and it's easy to see kind of why they would like what he brings to the table.
Do you want to go through the North Texas guys, or should we leave it there?
I think we keep those where they are for now until they happen, because I'm still trying to figure out how one of them even still has eligibility. But anymore, I don't think there are rules. So
yeah, rules are optional, I think, in terms of portaling and NIL right now. Maybe Keenan, you should go pull a Nico and start demanding $4 million from some random website to get your new deal done, huh?
yeah, NIL baby, transfer portal.
Yeah. Real quick on the baseball front, they're playing really well. 31-4. Can you believe that? First place in the Big 12.
That Marshall game was nuts, man.
That Marshall game was nuts. Steal a home to win it. That's what good teams do, though. I will say the last week has probably proved a lot more about this team than what most will think. They found another arm on a weekend rotation that can go give them length. Jack Cartsonis, he pitched 7 shutout innings on Sunday. If you can then have 2 pitchers that can really elevate your postseason chances in terms of what you can do, according to some projections, they're right now in hosting contention. But if you keep winning at the clip they're winning at, they will be fine when it comes to late May, early June in terms of hosting capabilities. And I know we both remember a few years ago when they hosted the first time around, it was a pretty jumping, bumping atmosphere in
That place
Morgantown.
was nuts the first night. That was nuts.
And I would assume Steve Sabins would want to get that going again. They've been banged up, but they've just continued to hit. They have a top 20 offense nationally in both batting average and runs scored. I think they're 24th in runs scored and 19th in batting average entering yesterday. So 3 games against Cincinnati this weekend at home. Mountaineers are first place in the Big 12. So if you keep winning, good things will happen.
Yep, it's simple as that. And I think I like the way that, Steve Sabins addressed, being asked about being ranked earlier this week. It's just about winning. Just keep winning and it'll take care of itself. And I think that you kind of thought maybe they got jinxed a little bit there for a second after getting ranked with what was happening against Marshall, but they once again pulled it out. And I think that this team's shown the ability to do that in tight situations much more often than not, obviously by what their record reflects. So a lot of exciting things going on with the baseball program right now, and I think that it deserves to be mentioned. I think that they've done an excellent job this year. There were high expectations, and so far I think that they've possibly exceeded those.
Yeah, it's hard to be a first-year head coach and have only 4 losses staring you in the face, and it's mid-April, and this is their 431 season in a row. I think it's like 7 out of their last 8. So it's starting to not just be a fluke and starting to kind of be you're turning into one of the more dominant northern programs in the country, which is kind of crazy to think of given where this program was, let's say when they entered the Big 12 or when they
Come a
were playing
long ways
at
since
Holly
the old
Field.
dusty Holly Field.
Yeah, but good for them. They play a couple of hours, and so yeah. Anything else you want to hit on before we get out of here?
It's like they say, man. If you build it, they will come. The new park and everything's that's followed. I mean, it's fun to see. That's a great environment for a baseball game.
Yeah, it's very kind of intimate. Obviously, college baseball kind of gives you that, but it's also still fun enough where you can take your kids, you can do whatever you got to do. So that'll wrap it up for this episode. We hope you enjoyed. We hope you made it this far. Keep it locked and go subscribe to our site if you did not. We have a lot of information there, a lot of good stuff, especially from Keenan there. He's been cranking it out this week on the website front, and it's been good to see. But I'm Wesley Shoemaker, joined by Keenan Cummings. If you made it this far, we do appreciate you listening. And this was the WVSports.com podcast.